The Senate chamber was buzzing with tension that morning. Every seat was filled, cameras were rolling, and journalists were ready to catch every word. Hillary Clinton walked in with the same confidence she had carried throughout her political career. Dressed in her signature suit, she moved toward the podium with a smile that suggested she already knew how this hearing would end. Her supporters in the gallery clapped, and whispers of approval echoed across the room. She adjusted the microphone, cleared her throat, and began her speech. Hillary's voice was strong and steady as she laid out her arguments. She spoke about leadership, experience, and the strength she claimed to bring to the table. Each point was delivered with the precision of someone who had spent decades in politics. The audience nodded along, and even some reporters were already typing out favorable notes for their headlines. For a moment, it seemed as though Hillary had complete control of the room. She was confident, even a little smug, believing no one could challenge her authority that day. But sitting just a few seats away, Senator John Kennedy watched quietly. He leaned back in his chair, listening intently, his hands folded on the table in front of him. Unlike the others, he wasn't impressed. His sharp eyes followed every word Hillary said, almost as if he was waiting for the right moment. He didn't interrupt, didn't react, and didn't even shift his posture. To anyone else, it looked like he was just another senator listening in. But behind that calm demeanor, Kennedy was preparing. When Hillary paused for a sip of water, the chamber was filled with applause. She smiled, clearly enjoying the praise. That was when John Kennedy slowly leaned forward, pressed his microphone button, and spoke in his southern drawl that carried more weight than a 100-page speech. The room fell silent instantly. Every head turned toward him. He started politely, acknowledging Hillary's long career, but then his tone shifted. He asked a question, simple, clear, but piercing, a question that struck directly at the heart of Hillary's claims. For the first time, Hillary hesitated. The smile on her face faltered just slightly, but enough for the audience to notice. Kennedy hadn't even begun his full rebuttal yet. The balance of power in the room had already started to shift. Kennedy's question lingered in the air like a thundercloud. Reporters glanced at one another, waiting to see how Hillary would respond. She straightened her back and forced a smile, trying to keep her composure. She gave a polished answer, filled with political phrases that sounded impressive on the surface. But Kennedy didn't blink. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on her, and calmly repeated his question, this time sharper, more direct, leaving no room for vague answers. The audience leaned in, sensing something unusual. Hillary's voice wavered ever so slightly as she tried again to defend herself. She listed her accomplishments, shifted the blame to others, and attempted to steer the discussion back to her comfort zone. But Kennedy wasn't letting go. Each time she dodged, he countered with another fact, another statistic, another piece of evidence that undercut her claims. The calm, deliberate way he spoke only made his words cut deeper. By now, the journalists had stopped typing and were staring intently, their fingers frozen above their keyboards. Even Hillary's closest allies in the chamber began exchanging nervous looks. The once confident rhythm of her speech was gone, replaced by hurried explanations and flashes of irritation. She raised her voice, trying to project authority, but the more she spoke, the more defensive she sounded. Kennedy, on the other hand, never raised his voice once. He didn't need to. His words carried the weight of undeniable truth. At one point, Hillary tried to laugh it off, dismissing Kennedy's line of questioning as political theater. But that only gave him the opening he had been waiting for. He adjusted his glasses, glanced briefly at his notes, and then delivered a line that sent a ripple through the chamber. He quoted her own past statements word for word, exposing the contradiction in her current arguments. The room erupted. Some gasped, others murmured, and a few even clapped before being silenced by the chair. Hillary's face stiffened. She attempted to recover, but it was clear she had been caught off guard. Kennedy didn't stop there. He laid out a series of documented facts, dates, figures, testimonies that directly challenged her narrative. With each point, her confidence crumbled a little more. She shuffled her papers, searching for a response, but the evidence was too strong. For the first time in her long career, she looked cornered. The tension in the chamber was electric. Cameras, zoomed in on Hillary's strained expression, then cut to Kennedy's calm and steady demeanor. He wasn't gloating, he wasn't aggressive, he was simply factual, precise, and relentless. That contrast made Hillary's defensiveness look even worse. By the time Kennedy finished his line of questioning, the silence was deafening. Hillary tried to regain control, but the damage had already been done. Everyone in the room knew it. Reporters whispered that they had just witnessed a turning point. Hillary had walked into the chamber expecting to dominate, but instead she was struggling to defend herself against a senator who had dismantled her arguments piece by piece. The humiliation wasn't in Kennedy shouting or insulting her, it was in the cold, undeniable weight of facts that left her without a strong response, and the audience could feel it. For a long moment, the chamber was silent. The weight of Kennedy's words hung in the air, pressing down on everyone present. Hillary shifted uncomfortably behind the podium, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for a friendly face, a lifeline that could pull her out of the corner she had been backed into, but all she saw were cameras, colleagues, and reporters staring at her with unblinking curiosity. Kennedy sat still, his expression calm, almost unreadable. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk. He simply let the silence do its work. And in that silence, the realization spread. Hillary Clinton, one of the most experienced and seasoned figures in American politics, had been left speechless. Finally, she tried to fight back. She raised her chin and launched into a lengthy defense, her voice louder than before, filled with urgency. She spoke of her years of service, her sacrifices, the battles she had fought on behalf of the people, but the words no longer carried the same weight. They sounded rehearsed, desperate, as though she was reciting a script that had already been torn apart. Kennedy waited patiently for her to finish. When she finally paused, out of breath, he leaned toward the microphone once more. His voice was steady, deliberate, every syllable cutting through the tension like a blade. He calmly pointed out that while experience was valuable, facts were undeniable. Then, with almost surgical precision, he brought up a final piece of evidence, something so clear, so irrefutable, that even Hillary's most loyal supporters in the room could not defend against it. The chamber erupted. Some gasped, others whispered, frantically to their neighbors, and the reporters' fingers flew across their keyboards, eager to capture the moment. The headline was writing itself right before their eyes. Hillary froze, her expression hardening, but the defeat was evident. She tried to respond, but no words came. She opened her mouth, then closed it, realizing that anything she said now would only make the situation worse. Kennedy leaned back, his point made. He didn't need to say more. The contrast was striking. Hillary, visibly shaken and defensive, and Kennedy, calm, collected, and completely in control of the narrative. The chamber had shifted, and everyone felt it. The chair attempted to restore order, calling for silence as murmurs filled the room. But the damage had already been done. The audience, the cameras, the press, they had all witnessed the same thing, a political giant humbled in front of the nation. As Hillary gathered her papers with trembling hands, she avoided eye contact with the cameras. She forced a smile, trying to mask the humiliation, but it fooled no one. Every lens caught the subtle signs, the hesitation in her movements, the tightness in her jaw, the way her eyes refused to meet Kennedy's. Kennedy, on the other hand, remained composed. He thanked the chair, closed his folder, and leaned back in his seat as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But everyone in the room knew that history had just been made. This wasn't a simple exchange of words. It was a turning point. Outside, as the hearing concluded, reporters rushed to file their stories. Headlines would scream across the nation within hours. Kennedy humiliates Clinton with facts. Clips of the exchange would flood social media, shared millions of times, dissected by analysts, celebrated by Kennedy's supporters, and reluctantly acknowledged even by Hillary's allies. For Hillary, it was more than just a tough day in the Senate. It was a blow to her image, a rare moment where her confidence and experience had not been enough to shield her. For Kennedy, it was a defining moment, a demonstration of sharp intellect, unwavering composure, and the power of truth spoken plainly. And for everyone watching, it was a reminder that in politics, No matter how powerful or experienced someone may be, facts still hold the ultimate authority. When the hearing ended, the air in the chamber was thick with tension. Senators began to shuffle out, some whispering quietly, others deliberately avoiding eye contact with the cameras. Hillary moved swiftly toward the exit, her shoulders squared, her face set in a practiced expression that tried to project control. But the sharpness in her stride and the stiffness in her movements revealed more than she intended. She had been shaken. Everyone who watched knew it. John Kennedy remained seated for a few moments longer, calmly gathering his papers, as if nothing remarkable had happened. He spoke briefly with a colleague, his voice measured and even. There was no sign of celebration or triumph in his demeanor. He didn't need to boast. His words in the chamber had already done all the talking. Outside the Senate doors, chaos awaited. A sea of reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, microphones stretching through the crowd. Questions flew at Hillary in rapid succession. Secretary Clinton, how do you respond to Senator Kennedy's remarks? Do you deny the facts presented today? Is this a turning point for you politically? Hillary kept her head down, repeating the same line over and over. I stand by my record. But the conviction in her voice was gone. Kennedy exited a few minutes later to an equally aggressive press corps. The questions hurled at him were sharp, but his responses were calm and brief. I simply stated the facts, he said. The American people deserve clarity. Then, without further comment, he walked toward his car, leaving the journalist to dissect his words. The restraint only fueled the story. His composure contrasted sharply with Hillary's defensiveness, and that image would play on every television screen that night. By evening, the exchange had become the headline of every major news outlet. Clips of the confrontation dominated social media. On Twitter, hashtags related to the hearing trended worldwide. Some users replayed Kennedy's final question again and again, marveling at how effortlessly he had dismantled Hillary's argument. Others mocked Hillary's faltering response, posting side-by-side videos comparing her confident entrance with her shaken exit. Talk shows and commentators wasted no time. Pundits on both sides of the political spectrum admitted that Hillary had been caught off guard. Supporters of Kennedy praised his sharp mind and calm delivery, calling it one of his most memorable moments in the Senate. Even critics who often disagreed with him acknowledged the effectiveness of his strategy. Hillary's defenders tried to downplay the incident, insisting that it was just one exchange among many in her long career. But the damage was clear. The visual impact of the hearing was impossible to erase. For ordinary citizens watching from home, the scene struck a chord. Some felt a sense of vindication, believing that Kennedy had finally said aloud what many had been thinking. Others simply admired the courage it took to stand up to a political heavyweight and not flinch. Kennedy's quiet but firm approach resonated deeply. It wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, it was simply truth, and truth had prevailed. The next morning, newspapers carried bold headlines. Kennedy confronts Clinton, facts over power. Editorials dissected every second of the exchange, analyzing Kennedy's strategy and Hillary's missteps. Political cartoons appeared, portraying Kennedy as a steady hand of reason, and Hillary as rattled and unprepared. Behind closed doors, party strategists scrambled to control the fallout. Hillary's team issued carefully worded statements, trying to reframe the debate, but the viral clips circulating online made that task nearly impossible. Every replay reminded viewers of her hesitation, her defensive tone, and the stark difference in composure between her and Kennedy. Meanwhile, Kennedy received messages of support from across the country. Letters, emails, and phone calls poured into his office, many thanking him for speaking the truth and for refusing to back down. In interviews later that week, he remained modest. He downplayed the drama, repeating that he had only done his job, and that facts should always guide public service. For Hillary, the exchange became a scar on her political record, a moment replayed in highlight reels whenever her credibility was questioned. For Kennedy, it became a defining chapter, proof of his ability to stand firm against one of the most seasoned figures in American politics and prevail through clarity and truth. In the other end, the confrontation left more than just headlines. It left a lesson, one that echoed far beyond the walls of the Senate chamber. Power, reputation, and years of experience may carry weight, but when challenged by facts, even the strongest voices can falter. And that day, in front of the nation, John Kennedy reminded everyone watching that truth still holds the power to humble giants. The atmosphere in the Senate chamber felt like it had reached a breaking point. The air was heavy, not just with political tension, but with the weight of truth that had been laid bare in the previous exchanges. Cameras zoomed in as John Kennedy leaned forward, his voice calm, yet razor-sharp, carrying the kind of authority that silenced even the loudest critics. Across from him, Hillary Clinton sat stiffly, her eyes flickering between anger and disbelief, her practiced composure now cracking under the relentless pressure. Kennedy didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Instead, he used precision, like a surgeon cutting through layers of defense. He pulled out documented reports, timelines, and direct quotes that contradicted Clinton's earlier statements. Each fact wasn't just presented, it was delivered with the deliberate weight of evidence that couldn't be denied. The more he spoke, the more the audience shifted in their seats, realizing they were watching something extraordinary. The dismantling of a political giant in real time. Hillary tried to fight back. She raised her voice, listing her years of experience, her accomplishments, and the challenges she claimed to have overcome. She painted herself as a victim of bias, of media attacks, of political vendettas, but the problem was, every time she tried to deflect, Kennedy was ready with another fact, another citation, another undeniable truth. It wasn't just debate, it was exposure. The silence between his statements carried more impact than her loudest rebuttals. The cameras captured her tightening jaw, her forced smile, and the nervous shuffle of her papers. Meanwhile, Kennedy stayed unflinching, almost surgical, in the way he stripped away every facade. The audience, both in the chamber and across millions of TV screens, could feel the power shift happening. Then came the moment that sealed it. Kennedy leaned back, looked directly at Clinton, and asked one simple, piercing question. If the truth is really on your side, why does it crumble every time we look closer? The chamber went dead silent. Clinton hesitated, her mouth opening but no clear words coming out. That pause, those few seconds of silence, was louder than any speech. It was the moment that revealed vulnerability in a figure once thought untouchable. Whispers spread through the crowd. Some senators avoided eye contact, others exchanged knowing looks. Even the media, usually eager to spin the narrative, seemed stunned into silence. For the first time, the spotlight wasn't on Clinton's power. It was on her collapse under the pressure of undeniable facts. Kennedy didn't gloat, didn't raise his hands in victory. He simply gathered his papers, his expression firm but composed. He had no need for theatrics. The truth had spoken for itself, and everyone knew it. By the time the session ended, the narrative had shifted. Commentators outside scrambled to make sense of what had just unfolded. Analysts replayed Kennedy's words, and social media erupted with clips of Clinton's silence after his final question. Hashtags trended, headlines screamed, and ordinary. People felt like they had witnessed history, an unshakable figure finally held accountable. As Clinton walked out of the chamber, her head slightly lowered, Kennedy's words still echoed. The image of that moment would replay endlessly, symbolizing the day facts triumphed over political theater. And for millions watching, it wasn't just about one senator against one former Secretary of State. It was about the enduring power of truth in a world where spin too often takes center stage. The days following the explosive confrontation were unlike anything Washington had seen in years. News cycles ran 24/7, replaying every second of the clash between John Kennedy and Hillary Clinton. Anchors dissected every pause, every glance, every carefully chosen word. Clips of Clinton's silence after Kennedy's final question dominated social media feeds, shared millions of times with captions like, "This is the moment everything changed." But while the world buzzed, Kennedy himself remained strangely quiet. He didn't rush to the cameras. didn't flood his Twitter feed with victory claims. Instead, he returned to his office, stacks of files spread across his desk, already preparing for what came next. For him, this wasn't about scoring points, it was about something far bigger. Meanwhile, Clinton's team scrambled. Press releases were drafted, talking points rehearsed, and allies were called in to provide cover. But no matter how they tried to spin it, the raw footage spoke louder than any defense. Voters weren't watching polished press conferences. They were watching that one haunting pause, the silence that suggested guilt, or, at the very least, defeat. Behind closed doors, party insiders whispered about damage control. Some urged Clinton to step away gracefully, to avoid further humiliation. Others insisted she fight harder, to prove she still had control. But the truth was, the ground had shifted beneath her feet, and nothing would return to the way it had been. Kennedy, on the other hand, became a symbol overnight. To many Americans, he represented the voice they had long been waiting for, the voice that didn't bend under pressure, that refused to be silenced by titles or reputations. His calm delivery, his reliance on facts rather than insults had resonated deeply. People weren't just admiring his performance, they were inspired by it. Soon, invitations flooded in. News networks wanted exclusive interviews, universities wanted him to speak to students about truth and politics, and grassroots movements adopted his words as rallying cries. The phrase, "If the truth is really on your side, why does it crumble? When we look closer," appeared on posters, t-shirts, and even protest signs across the country. Yet Kennedy remained grounded. He told his staff, "This isn't about me, it's about setting a standard. If we can't demand honesty here, in the highest halls of power, where else can we demand it?" His words reminded everyone that this was not the climax of a personal rivalry, but the beginning of a cultural shift. Clinton, however, wasn't ready to fade quietly. Days later, she scheduled a televised appearance, her attempt to reclaim the narrative. Sitting in front of a carefully chosen backdrop, she spoke about her years of service, her sacrifices, and her vision for America. But as polished as her words were, viewers couldn't shake the memory of her silence in the chamber. Every sentence sounded like an attempt to patch up a wound that was far too deep. In living rooms across the nation, families watched and compared. Some shook their heads, others laughed bitterly, and many simply turned the channel. What Kennedy had exposed couldn't be undone with carefully crafted speeches. The damage wasn't just political, it was personal. Her credibility, once her strongest weapon, now looked fragile and unconvincing. Kennedy's approach, by contrast, only grew more respected. His refusal to mock or insult made him appear statesmanlike, even to those who didn't agree with his politics. He had managed to humiliate a political titan without ever raising his voice, proving that truth, when wielded correctly, was more powerful than the sharpest insult. By the end of the week, polls reflected what everyone already felt. Clinton's approval had dropped sharply, while Kennedy's popularity soared. But to Kennedy, these numbers were secondary. What mattered was the precedent that had been set, that even the most powerful figures could be held accountable when faced with undeniable facts. The story was no longer just about one senator and one former Secretary of State. It had become a symbol of something larger, a reminder that in a world clouded by spin, deception, and endless narratives, the truth still had the power to cut through like lightning. And as Kennedy prepared for his next move, one thing was certain. This battle had changed the game forever. The storm had passed, but the echoes of it lingered in every corner of Washington. For weeks, the confrontation between John Kennedy and Hillary Clinton remained the centerpiece of national conversation. Analysts kept replaying the chamber showdown. Journalists filled columns with interpretations, and ordinary citizens debated what it meant for the future of American politics. But inside Kennedy's office, the atmosphere was calm. Papers were neatly stacked, staffers worked quietly, and Kennedy himself sat at his desk, reviewing new briefs. To him, the battle wasn't a trophy to display. It was a reminder of responsibility. He understood the weight of what had happened. A single exchange had shifted public trust, dismantled a carefully built image and reminded the world that power, no matter how entrenched, could still be challenged. Hillary Clinton, meanwhile, faced a crossroads. Her once unshakable presence in American politics had cracked. She still held influence, but the sheen of invincibility was gone. The silence in that chamber, the moment when her words failed her, haunted every appearance, every speech, every attempt at a comeback. The world had seen a glimpse of vulnerability, and it was impossible to erase. In private, Clinton wrestled with the aftermath. Some advisors urged her to step back, to protect what remained of her legacy. Others pushed her to fight harder, to prove she could still stand. But deep down, she knew the battle had changed the narrative forever. She could speak, argue, and defend, but she could never erase the fact that she had been humbled in the most public way possible. For Kennedy, however, this wasn't about personal victory. In interviews, he never once claimed triumph over Clinton. Instead, he spoke about truth, accountability, and the duty of leaders to answer honestly, no matter their status. His humility only amplified the respect he earned. He had shown America that politics didn't have to be about shouting matches or empty rhetoric. It could still be about facts, fairness, and courage. The public responded with overwhelming support. Universities invited him to speak about integrity. Civic groups honored him for his courage. And across the nation, people repeated his words as if they were a new anthem. If the truth is really on your side, why does it crumble when we look closer? That line, born in a heated chamber, became a rallying cry beyond politics. It was quoted in classrooms, at rallies, in community meetings. Parents repeated it to their children, teachers used it in lessons, and activists carried it on banners. It had transcended politics and become a principle, an idea that truth should never fear scrutiny. Months later, when Kennedy walked back into that same chamber, the air was different. Colleagues looked at him with newfound respect, some with admiration, others with caution. He wasn't just another senator. He had become a symbol of accountability. And though Washington had seen many dramatic moments, this one had left a mark deeper than most. Clinton's presence in politics gradually dimmed. She still had her loyal supporters, but her aura of untouchability had vanished. The confrontation hadn't just been a clash of words. It had been a turning point, a reminder that even the most powerful could be brought to account by the force of truth. As Kennedy left the chamber that day, the cameras caught him walking quietly, papers tucked under his arm. No grand gestures, no victory smile. Just a man who had spoken the truth and let it stand on its own. The nation had witnessed something rare, humility and courage defeating arrogance and spin. And so the story closed, not with shouting or spectacle, but with a simple, enduring truth. Facts are stronger than fear, and integrity will always outlast deception.